अरे रोको भाई
Imagine you are a father. You have spent your entire life building something. Not wealth, not status. Something far more fragile and far more precious than either of those things. You have built a person. You fed her, you worried over her. You stayed up nights calculating how to give her more than you ever had. You watched her grow into someone who looked at the world not with fear, not with hesitation, but with hunger. A hunger you recognized because you put it there. And then one day, you sent her across the ocean. Because that is what love looks like sometimes. Not holding on, letting go with both hands, with your whole heart, with every prayer you know by name. The phone rings again. You answer it. And in the space of a single sentence, in the time it takes for words to travel from someone else's mouth into your ear, and then down into the place where you keep everything that matters, your world ends. Your daughter is gone, but here is what they don't prepare you for. Here is the part that no grief counselor, no religious text, no well-meaning friend could ever have warned you about. You board a plane, thousands of miles, Florida. You arrive running on nothing but the desperate animal instinct of a parent who needs to see his child one last time, to hold her hand, to look at her face, to say the things you never got to say, or maybe the things you said 1,000 times and want to say just once more. And the authorities sit you down, and they begin to explain. The heat in Florida, the days that passed before she was found, the condition of the body. They tell you gently, carefully, with all the professional compassion they can summon, that the person you have traveled across the world to see is no longer recognizable. That word, unrecognizable. Let it sit with you for a moment, because that word is not just a medical term. It is not just a forensic detail filed away in a case report. That word is the sound of a father's legs giving out beneath him. That word is the sound of a man's body deciding, before his mind can even catch up, that it simply cannot hold the weight of what it has just been told. He collapses. Not from illness, not from weakness, but from love, from the specific, catastrophic species of pain that only exists when you have given everything you are to another human being and then lost them in the cruelest way imaginable. This is the story of Nahida Bristy, a Bangladeshi student, a dreamer, a daughter, who crossed an ocean to build a future and was found at the bottom of one instead. This is the story of what was done to her, of who did it, of the forensic truth that refused to stay buried no matter how carefully it was hidden. But more than any of that, this is the story of a father and the word that broke him. Unrecognizable. Somewhere in Bangladesh, a man is going about his day. Maybe he is drinking tea. Maybe he is sitting in the kind of quiet that only exists in the early morning before the world wakes up and makes its demands. He is a father. And like most fathers who have sent their children far away, he has learned to live with a particular kind of background noise, a low, constant hum of worry that never fully goes away, but that he has made peace with, because his daughter is smart. His daughter is capable. His daughter is in America, studying, building, becoming. And then his phone rings. We are not going to skip past that moment. We are going to stay in it because everything that follows, every piece of evidence, every forensic detail, every courtroom development draws its meaning from what happens to this man in the seconds after he answers that call. The investigation matters. The suspect matters. The justice that Nahida Bristy's family is still waiting for matters enormously. But none of it matters the way this man matters. None of it hurts the way he hurts. And if you are going to understand this story, truly understand it, you have to start here, with a father, with a phone, with the moment the world he knew stopped existing. Her name was Nahida Bristy. She was a young Bangladeshi woman who did something that takes a particular kind of courage. She left. She packed her life into luggage, said goodbye to everything familiar, and crossed oceans to study at the University of South Florida. In Bangladesh, she was not just a girl. She was a symbol of something. She was the one the family pointed to with that quiet, swelling pride that parents carry in their chests like a second heartbeat. She was the one who was going to make it. Think about what that means for a moment. Think about the weight of being the one. The sacrifices that went into her education, into her visa, into her ticket, into every single thing required to place a young woman from Bangladesh inside a university in the United States. That is not a small thing. That is a family's faith made visible. That is years of work and prayer and sleepless nights compressed into one person, one dream, one phone call to home every week that said, "I am okay. I am here. I am becoming what you believed I could be." And for a while, that is exactly what she was doing. But at some point, the calls stopped. This is where the silence begins. And if you have ever had someone you love go quiet in a way that feels wrong, not the silence of a busy day or a dead phone battery, but the silence that sits in your stomach like something cold and heavy, then you already understand what Nahida's family began to feel. Days passed. The phone rang out. Messages went unanswered. For a family in Bangladesh already managing the baseline anxiety of having their daughter an ocean away, this particular silence was not peaceful. It was a warning dressed up as nothing. Her father started making calls, to her number, to her university, to anyone connected to her life in Florida who might be able to say, "She is fine, she is just busy, you are worrying too much." But the answers that came back were not reassuring. They were the sound of people who also did not know, people who had also noticed the absence, people who were also beginning to feel that something was wrong in a way that had no clean explanation yet. What the family could not have known, what none of them could have seen from thousands of miles away, was that by the time the silence began, the truth was already submerged, literally, hidden beneath the surface of the water, sealed away, placed somewhere that someone had calculated would buy enough time for everything to go cold. The calls home had stopped because Nahida Bristy was already gone, and someone knew that. Someone had made sure of it. The discovery did not come the way discoveries in criminal investigations are supposed to come. There was no tip, no confession, no surveillance camera that caught the right moment at the right angle. The truth about Nahida Bristy surfaced the way truth so often does in the worst kind of stories, by accident. On an ordinary afternoon, in a place where no one was looking for anything except a quiet few hours on the water. A man was kayaking, fishing rod in hand, the kind of afternoon that asks nothing of you and gives you just enough stillness to forget for a moment that the world has edges. He cast his line, and then he felt it, that pull, not the familiar darting resistance of a fish, something slower, something dense, something that did not move the way living things move. He reeled it in carefully, a bag, floating just beneath the surface, heavy with everything it had been made to conceal. Something told him not to walk away from it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the smell that had already reached him before the bag cleared the water. Whatever it was, he stopped. He opened it, and the world around him, that peaceful, unremarkable stretch of water on an ordinary afternoon, stopped being ordinary forever. Inside was a decomposing body. He called the police, and within hours, what had been hidden beneath that quiet surface became the center of a criminal investigation that would reach from Tampa, Florida, all the way to a family sitting in Bangladesh, waiting for a phone that had already told them too much and not yet told them everything. Forensic teams worked carefully, methodically. The state of the remains made identification through visual means impossible. DNA testing and dental records were brought in to do what human eyes could not, and eventually, the confirmation came. The body pulled from the water in a bag, left in a place where someone had calculated it would never be found, was Nahida Bristy. 20-something years of a life, a family's entire hope, a father's second heartbeat. In a bag in the water, gone. Now, here is where I need you to pay attention, because this is the part of the story that moves from tragedy into something darker, something colder, something that speaks not to a moment of violence but to something far more deliberate. Investigators turned their attention to an apartment near the University of South Florida. On the surface, it looked exactly the way an apartment is supposed to look: ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of space that blends into the background of a university neighborhood without drawing a second glance. No chaos, no obvious signs of struggle, nothing that announced itself as a place where something terrible had happened. But forensic technology does not need chaos to find the truth. It only needs time and the right tools. Blue star luminescence, a chemical used to detect the presence of blood even after it has been cleaned, lit up the kitchen. Not a small amount. A large pool spreading across the floor in a pattern that told investigators exactly what had happened there and approximately where the person had been standing when it began. The trail did not stay in the kitchen. It moved, down the hallway, into a bedroom. On the carpet, faint but unmistakable, was the outline of a human body. The shape of someone who had been placed there, curled, positioned, and left. And then investigators found something that stopped them. Two body-shaped impressions, side by side, on the floor. Two people had been placed in that room, which means Nahida Bristy was not the only one. The air conditioning in that apartment had been set abnormally low, not the kind of low you set it on a hot Florida day when you want to be comfortable. The kind of low that slows things down. The kind of low that someone sets deliberately, with specific knowledge of what cold temperatures do to decomposition. This was not carelessness. This was not panic. This was someone who understood what they had done and took deliberate steps to manage the consequences of it. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it takes to do that. To commit an act of violence against another human being and then, in the hours that follow, to think clearly enough to adjust the thermostat, to plan the disposal, to move a body, seal it in a bag, transport it to the water, and submerge it in a place chosen specifically because it seemed unlikely anyone would look there, and then to go back to the apartment, and reset it, and wait. The neighbors had heard sounds, but sounds in apartment buildings are easy to explain away. A dropped box, a moved piece of furniture, the ordinary percussion of people living their lives in close quarters. Nobody had looked, nobody had knocked, and for days, perhaps longer, the truth had simply existed in that space, in the fibers of the carpet, in the chemical traces on the kitchen floor, in the cold, carefully maintained air of a room that had been turned into something no room should ever be. The second victim connected to this case, Jamil Lemon, had been placed in a box, carried out of that apartment the way you carry out furniture you no longer want, disposed of separately, differently, as though the person doing this was managing a logistical problem rather than confronting the reality of what they had done to two human beings. When you lay all of that out, the blood, the body impressions, the controlled temperature, the separate and calculated disposals, what you are looking at is not a crime of rage, not a moment where something went wrong and someone panicked. What you are looking at is a plan. A cold, detailed, deliberately executed plan that involved not just ending two lives, but managing the evidence of those lives being ended with a level of composure that should disturb every single person watching this. A roommate, Hisham Salah, was arrested and charged. And the public exhaled, because that is what we do when an arrest is made. We exhale. We feel the shape of something that resembles resolution, a name, a face, a person to hold accountable, and an arrest is important. It is necessary. It is the beginning of justice. But this documentary is not going to let you exhale completely, because when you sit with the full picture, the precision of the planning, the management of two separate victims, the calculated reset of the crime scene, the deliberate choice of disposal locations, a question forms quietly in the back of your mind. It is not an accusation. It is not a conspiracy. It is simply an honest question that the evidence raises on its own. Could one person have done all of this alone? That question is not answered here. It may not be answered for some time. What it does is remind us that an arrest is a door opened, not a case closed. And Nahida Bristy's family, her father specifically, deserves more than a door opened. He deserves to walk through it and find the full truth waiting on the other side. While investigators were working through the apartment, through the forensics, through the careful reconstruction of what had happened, and when Nahida's father was in a hospital bed in Florida. Not because he was sick, because there is a specific kind of pain that the human body registers as a medical event. A pain so total, so complete, so far beyond what our systems are built to process, that the body makes a decision the mind has not yet caught up to. It shuts down. It falls. It forces the person carrying that pain horizontal, because vertical is no longer a position the body can justify. He had come to Florida to bring his daughter home. He had traveled thousands of miles on borrowed strength, running on grief and the most fundamental instinct a parent possesses, the need to see, to confirm, to be present, physically present in the same space as the person he loved, even if that person was gone. He needed to see her face. He needed to sit beside whatever remained of her and say the things that do not survive a phone call, the things that require presence, that require proximity, that require a father and a daughter in the same room one final time. And he was told he could not. He begged. Of course he begged, because you would, because anyone would, because the idea of traveling that far and being told no, being told that the distance between you and your child is no longer measured in miles, but in the irreversible damage done to a body left in water for too long, is a kind of cruelty so specific and so devastating that it does not have a name in any language. The doctors understood what he was not yet ready to accept. There are images, they knew, that cannot be unseen. What remained of Nahida Bristy was not what her father was picturing when he closed his eyes on that plane. It was not the daughter he remembered. And the people in that room, whatever their professional composure, understood that showing him would not give him closure. It would only replace one wound with another. And so he collapsed, on the floor of that hospital, in a country that was not his, surrounded by people who were trying their best to be kind but who could not give him the one thing he had come for. He is the center of this story, not because his pain is more important than Nahida's life, but because his pain is the most honest measurement of what her life was worth. Every degree of his collapse is a degree of her value. Every second he spent on that floor is a second that tells you exactly what kind of person Nahida Bristy was to the people who loved her. She was everything, and everything was taken. Across the University of South Florida campus, students who had never met Nahida Bristy began walking the same paths differently. Something had shifted in the air. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the quiet, recalibrating way that communities process the realization that their sense of safety was built on assumptions they never examined. The assumption that danger announces itself, that it comes from outside, that it wears a face you do not recognize and approaches you in places that feel unsafe. But Nahida Bristy was not taken from a dark street by a stranger. She was taken from inside a space that was supposed to be safe, by someone who shared that space with her, someone who ate in the same kitchen, breathed the same apartment air, and whose name she probably said casually, the way you say the names of people you live alongside without ever imagining you need to be afraid of them. The Bangladeshi student community in the United States felt this case the way you feel something that was meant for someone else but lands on you anyway. Because every Bangladeshi student studying abroad, every young man or woman who packed their life into luggage and crossed an ocean with a family's hope sewn into their carry-on recognized something of themselves in Nahida. They had made the same choice she made. They were living the same version of the same dream. And now that dream had a new shadow in it. Families began calling more. Parents who had been quietly managing their worry now let it become louder. Students who had never thought twice about their living arrangements, their roommates, their building security began asking questions they had not known to ask before. And from that community, from that grief, came calls for something better. Better screening processes for student housing. Faster institutional responses when a student goes missing. A system that takes seriously the silence of someone who was supposed to check in and did not. Nahida Bristy's death is not just a tragedy. It is a failure of every layer of protection that was supposed to exist between a young woman far from home and the worst thing that could happen to her. And the people who knew her, who studied beside her, who shared her experience of being Bangladeshi and young and ambitious in a country that was not the one they grew up in, are now carrying that failure alongside their grief. That is a heavy thing to ask a community to carry. And it is a weight that belongs, at least in part, to every institution that could have caught this earlier, responded faster, looked harder at a student who had gone silent. There is no verdict yet as this story is told. The legal process moves at its own pace, indifferent to the urgency of a father's grief or a community's need for resolution. Hisham Saleh has been charged. The evidence is substantial. The forensics are damning. But the courtroom has its own timeline, and justice, when it comes, will arrive slowly, procedurally, in language that sounds nothing like what Nahida's father felt when he hit that hospital floor. What we can say, what this story insists on saying, clearly and without qualification, is that Nahida Bristy was a person. A full, specific, irreplaceable person. She was not a case number. She was not a headline. She was not a detail in a forensic report or a name in a court filing. She was a girl from Bangladesh who wanted more from the world and had the courage to go looking for it. She was the dream her family built together and sent across the ocean with prayers they said loud enough to reach Florida. She was her father's entire world. And her father, the man who collapsed on a hospital floor in a country that was not his, who traveled thousands of miles to see his daughter's face and was told he could not, that man is still waiting for justice, for answers, for the full truth of what happened inside that apartment and in the water where his daughter was found. He deserves that truth, not a piece of it, not the comfortable version of it, all of it. Because Nahida Bristy gave him everything she had. The least the world can do is give him that. Her name was Nahida Bristy. She was unrecognizable at the end, but she was not unknowable. We know who she was. We know what she meant. And we are not going to let that become just another story that people scroll past. Remember her name.